Always the fun bit of these sessions, waiting for everyone to go in. And just to let you know, this session is being recorded. Was just checking the red light is on. The red light is on. So that means if you do have to duck out, if your connection drops off or something happens and you can't stay to the end, or you just want to rewatch it, we will be putting that up on our YouTube page, Council YouTube page, and have a link from our website. It can take a little bit of time to get that uploaded, but rest assured it will happen, and we will send you a link to that as well for all the people that are registered for tonight. So that will be good. Okay. How are we going? Yeah, we could kick it off. It's already 7:06, so I don't want everyone staying too late. So happy to get started now if everybody else is ready too. So just that little reminder, just please turn off your video and microphone unless you're asking a question, and we can mute you if you haven't done that and it's causing some interference. So before we officially begin today, I'd like to say that Nillumbik Shire Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land, and we would like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who may be present tonight. For those that don't know me, my name is Michelle Hanslow. I'm an Environment Project Officer at Nillumbik Shire Council. And I started with Council 3 years ago as Biodiversity Officer, and for the last 2 years I've been managing 3 different deer control projects, or not all deer control. 2 are deer control and 1 is this education and engagement project. So today's presentation is part of this collaborative community deer control project, and that project is funded by a Communities Environment Program grant from the federal government. And this is the 3rd of at least 6 deer webinars that we're holding for the first half of 2021. And we'll be focusing tonight on managing deer with your neighbours. We're going to look at different ways to engage with others who are experiencing similar issues, and look at different control options you can consider and what might work in your area. As I said before, we do hope to have the recordings of the previous sessions online for you soon. So if you haven't managed to tune into those, you'll be able to watch them. So in September last year, we ran a session which was covering all aspects of deer that we could think about, what sort of damage they cause, control options, and how to protect your property, but just all at a very introductory level. And in March this year, we ran a session on identification and monitoring so that you can work out whether you've got deer on your property. And then a couple of weeks ago, we ran a session on deer shooting in peri-urban areas. So that was focused on control with firearm use, and that went into a fair bit of detail on the permits and requirements for that. We will have further sessions coming up in the future, including property management options for deer on your property, so things like fencing and harbour management. That's coming up at the end of May. I'll give you all the details for that later. And as a heads up, tonight is interactive, or as interactive as you would like to be. We do have the option for you to turn your camera and microphone on, so if you want to ask a question and have that recorded in front of everyone, you may do that. But if you want to just write it in the chat, any of your questions, that's fine too. And actually, if you want to ask a question live, just let us know in that chat. I've gone through the basic housekeeping of audio and video. Just a request, tonight's not about promoting your business, so if you are a hunter, I don't want to see any phone numbers or emails, so please contact me for deer control services. We'll have other opportunities to do that later. So before we get into the actual session, I need to introduce to you our special guests for tonight. We've got quite a panel who may have turned their videos off. We have the lovely Stephanie. I can see her there. She's our Land Management Officer, and she'll be managing the questions on the chat. Any tech issues, not including my mouth. and will tell us all about the land management incentive program that Council runs. There's our other lovely faces. We have Tracey Wood from the Jumping Creek Catchment Landcare Group, Mike Hall from the Cardinia Deer Management Coalition, I think I've got that name right, and Artur Muchow, who is from the Middle Yarra Landcare Network. I think I've covered everyone there. So thank you so much, guys, for helping me out tonight. So that might help answer some of the questions in the chat. Okay, it'd be really great before we start if I could find out in advance what people are hoping to gain from tonight and what questions you're hoping to have answered by this session. So I guess I'm trying to find out whether I'm talking to a group of hunters or mainly landholders having problems with deer on their property. So if you're able to pop a comment into the chat, that would be really great. If we don't get any comments, that's fine too, because we're going to tell you what we know and what we think will work for you. Just my slides are very slow tonight, so I'll click go and there we go. Cross tenure control. It's good to have comments from the panelists, and that's a reasonable point. We're all learning and growing, and we can't say that we know everything. So even as panelists and presenters, we don't know every little thing there is about how to manage deer. So part of the collaboration is us all working together and sharing information with each other, and I think that's really important to continue to do that. All right, so I am going to make the assumption that everyone is here tonight because you understand that deer numbers need to be reduced. And so I'm not going to go into details of the damage that deer cause or population statistics. So if you want any information on that, I recommend that you catch up on our previous webinars, in particular the introduction to deer in Nillumbik, which is on Council's YouTube page and on our website. So tonight we are going to cover why we need to manage deer collaboratively, and we'll look at some local examples of community and collaborative deer control work. So hence our panellists who'll be representing those programs that have been undertaken in the Jumping Creek Catchment Landcare area, the Cardinia Creek Catchment area, I think that's correct, and Strathewen up near King Lake National Park. They've been undertaking some deer harvesting, and I'll talk a little bit about the Sugarloaf Link project. We will cover our Nillumbik's Land Management Incentive Program grants, and I'll just briefly mention our Community Deer Directory as well. Just checking the other comments. Yeah, how to talk to your neighbours and how to put together a group management plan. That's an excellent question. Here's another one as well. Yep. So everyone's looking to control their deer problem locally, and I think that's quite reasonable, but it's always best to do it with some help. Okay, so these maps and images are just to demonstrate how widespread deer are throughout Nillumbik. These are some of the records. Those red numbers there indicate how many records have been made at that location, not how many deer. Each record might have been saw 5 deer. Can't tell from this, but as you can see, they're spread all the way through Nillumbik in the rural areas and a lot in the semi-rural and quite urban areas as well. So sometimes we need to consider the fact that those areas where the deer are appearing are just not appropriate for management on site, and so collaborating with people in other areas can be a good way of still getting some good impact. Okay, so why do we want to manage collaboratively? Well, I think our guests will give us a lot more details on what they found from actually undertaking it themselves. But what we found is that getting more properties involved leads to better outcomes because you can control deer across a wider area. Collaborating with your neighbours also enables more strategic planning because you can target areas that might require more deer control. So look at high biodiversity areas and focus works around those areas first, rather than perhaps low biodiversity areas. case-by-case basis. It's easier to coordinate work so to minimise disturbance, and what I mean by that is if landholders are individually undertaking control, they may have a shooter out Monday night for this property, Tuesday night for that property, Wednesday night for that property. So for the other neighbours not involved, they've got shooting every night of the week. So if we can coordinate works and minimise the number of nights where shooting takes place, that can minimise some disturbance. Sharing costs is a big one. If you're in peri-urban areas, there is often a cost to deer control, and so sharing that amongst a number of properties can really help. So, as I mentioned before, sometimes your own property might be unsuitable for deer control, so collaborating with others enables you to undertake control on a neighbour's property where there is easier access, flatter terrain, something that is more conducive towards easy control and perhaps controlling more deer numbers in that location. Sharing responsibility, I think that's a really nice one. The deer are often seen to be somebody else's problem. It's Parks Victoria's problem. They hide in the parks. It's Melbourne Water's problem. They hide in the Bergen. There's always something that makes people think that it's somebody else's responsibility. Currently, they're not listed as a pest animal, so they are nobody's responsibility. But Council believes that if we all work together, we can have some sort of positive impact, and everyone should get involved with doing that. There's no point stopping at the boundary between private land and public land. It has to be everywhere for a better outcome. And also giving consideration to the fact that whilst that property here might be full of thick vegetation and that's where the deer are bedding down for the night and breeding perhaps, the open properties next door with the dam or the luscious garden is where the deer are feeding. And deer might also just be passing through some properties on the way to other properties. So all these things need to be considered when working out where the best, most productive location for deer control might be. So yes, we're looking at maximising productivity overall and to be able to select the safest shoot site. So whilst you might have deer on your property and want them gone, your property might not be a safe location for shooting. So working with neighbours that do have properties that are appropriate, much better. And the other thing to note is that if you're working with a large number of properties in areas where there are high deer numbers, you've got a better opportunity to get harvesters involved, and that's a really good option because they might pay you for the privilege of removing those deer at no cost to you whatsoever, which is great. So I'm about to hand over to Tracey and Artur to tell us about how Manningham or Jumping Creek Catchment have gone about doing deer control. But first, can I just check, Steph, if there are any questions about what I have said?
No questions yet, although they might roll in now that you've prompted everyone. Yeah, just some responses from your initial question around what brought people to the webinar tonight and what they were interested to get out of it. There's an invasive species scientist here. Hi, Paula. I visited Paula. She has a terrible deer camp on her property. We need to sort something out there.
Yeah, and Paula's is a great example of a property where control is just not great. So we've got to look at other areas, and maybe I might even have her area on a map that we can have a look at later if we get some time.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Excellent. That sounds good. I think we'll cover most of those questions. So I can probably hand over to Tracey and Artur at this point. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle. Are you there, Artur?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. Okay, that's great. My name's Tracey Wood, as Michelle said, and I'm from Jumping Creek Catchment Landcare Group. Michelle's just put up the first letter I sent out in January 2017, inviting our members and our neighbours and however many people got that letter to two meetings. The council put out a meeting, organised a meeting. Over 100 people attended that, and we had a follow-up meeting the week after where we put out opportunities for people to join in a group control program, and so we canvass the viability of a community approach. In the meantime, Council have been working out a wonderful deer monitoring and culling program designed by two scientists who specialise in ecology, and put together this, and so we're able to use this plan and invite people to join us. So the first year we got 11 people, and throughout the time we've been building up, we've got 20 now. So it's taken us a while to build it up. And you can see here where we have our landholders. This map's interesting because you can see our group, and then you can see the outlying groups. There are 12 landholders along the Brushy Creek. You can see to the north of that map. And they started about the same time. They work on a little bit of a different model from us, which is interesting. And then there are other individual landholders that practice deer control, but they're not actually in our group. So what happened was, as our role in from the Landcare perspective, we were able to really educate people, talk to our neighbours, send out summaries of meetings, invite people to other meetings. Every year we hold an AGM where we're giving people the latest report on how our project is going, and also to try and get commitment for the next year. So a program involves two sections. One is monitoring and one is culling. We have a large area. Here we go. We have 15 exclosure fences which were erected. Now that involves vegetation audits. And so the idea is that the deer can't get in, but other marsupials and native animals can. And we are trying to see the impacts of deer browsing throughout the 5-year period of this program. We have 40 nature plots, which are open plots, not fenced off plots, and they're looked at twice a year. And we also have 40 camera traps installed randomly around the area. A whole area. Artur maintains and looks after that. Now, Artur is the facilitator for Middle Yarra Landcare Network, and he works in with us. So we're a good example of council working with Landcare and also the two parts of Landcare. Council provides help for, pays people to help with the nature plots. We also have auditing them, and we also have volunteers. And council has already also provided the staff to look at these 4.5, almost 500,000 photos. So Artur makes sure he recharges the batteries. Artur also sends out SMS messages to a very large number. I think it's 40 or 50. Artur, you'll be able to tell me, and telling them that deer control is happening. He liaises with our professional licensed shooter. We're actually coincidentally having it tonight. So we send out an SMS saying that the shooting is happening from 7 p.m. until 6 a.m. So everybody knows to either keep their animals in, or they know there might be a possibility of shooting in their area. We have 20 people say, but not everyone has shooting on their properties. Many people join from a variety of reasons. As Michelle mentioned, it is good to have people on board, but some people know their properties are not suitable for culling, but they're still joining the landscape effort because it's important to them to do what they can with pest control in their area. Other people, we have their properties, they don't want any shooting on their properties, but they still, even if it could occur, but they still pay because they're keen on the project. As a Landcare group, what we do is we charge the people $350 every year. and council contributes to this on a 2/3 basis. So one person participating in this program provides $1,050 towards deer control, deer culling. So we've got every year about $20,000. It's a small program, but we manage for our hunter to come out most weeks. He's coming out weekly now, and he often will cull around anything from 3 to 6 deer. So we're at it constantly. So our role has been to support our participants, to educate them, to liaise with them, and also just to try and get our neighbours to join, just chatting to them and so forth. We are at the front line when people want to ring us and find out things. We might have to refer them to Sam Gilbert at Council. He is helping us at Manningham Council. We basically look after the funds. We take the money, well, they deposit it into our bank account. We pay the shooter, he invoices us, we pay, and then it's a streamlined approach. We contact council, our treasurer puts in the invoice, and council gives us 2/3 back. So it's sort of this revolving door of funds there all the time. What we've learned, just briefly, it is a revolving door of people coming and going. Lots of people sell properties. Lots of people, we've had deaths, we've had a change of heart, we've had unemployment, and people can't afford to contribute. The COVID put it, we had a bit of a gap there. So we've got this revolving door, which obviously isn't ideal, but it's taught us to be flexible and to relax a little bit about it. We do what we can do. This year we've had a few, as I said, non-payers who have said, you can use my land, and if the land's strategically important, we will, but we're not paying, which is good that we can use their land for shooting, because they might have the best, safest aspects for that. But it sort of would be great if we could have funds from them. But we understand there are other people who say they'll pay and there's no shooting on their properties because they either don't want it or it's not suitable. There are a lot of loyal people who are loyal to our program, who will just join because they believe in it. And they're happy to contribute to the common good, the landscape effort, and we're really grateful for that. But really, it is the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot more to do. We would love more money, and of course, we would love more participants. But we're committed to our 5-year program, and as I said, it is a monitoring program as well as a culling program. And the vegetation audits and the cameras are a great source of data, and it'll be really exciting when we get that 5 years of data and we can have a look and see what we've done. So that's basically what our Landcare group does, and we have a lot of support. So we're a small Landcare group, and we're very happy to have all this extra support. It's great. Artur, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very exhaustive. So here you see what we, whenever the contractor done his work, he gives a report what he has done, where he has done it. So we know exactly where he shot, what kind of species, what kind of gender. And here you see the overview that let's say over three and a quarter years, because the 2016, 2017 you don't need to look at. He shot 250 deer, but he could have shot 180 more if we would have had more access to other properties. But that gives us also a pretty good result. On one hand, that he shot almost 2.5 deer every visit he came. As Tracey said, we switched over to a weekly visit. We had also times where we had only a visit every fortnight. And we get also input from the landholders, and we seek input from the landholders where they hear or see deer on their property, mainly here, and so that we can then direct the contractor to that properties. But with the cameras, we get a lot of additional information where deer is, because on one hand, we know over the last 3 years now where the hotspots are, but we still have properties where deer is seen or photographed by the cameras, but when the contractor goes there, he can't see any deer. So there are still some questions open, and we want to we will work on that, how we get to that knowledge, and how we can trace deer better. I must also say that compared to all the others in coming after us, Cardinia and Yarra Ranges and so on, and Nillumbik, our properties are around about between, let's say, 4 to 10 acres. So the land where he can shoot, the contractor can shoot, is pretty small. And I'll give you an example. As Tracey said, we tell the landholders and the neighbors of the landholders that when the contractor comes, and I got one feedback immediately from one of the landholders and said, look, don't come to my property. I have at the moment my granddaughter with me. She is just 1 year, and every time the contractor comes around, the dogs start barking, and so we have hell at home. So we said, okay, we miss your property this time. So that helps also the neighborhood, so that you accommodate special wishes, or make it easier for the neighborhood and for the hunter. That doesn't apply for bigger properties, because if you are far away from wider properties, then you don't have that problem. But we have that problem, so therefore we cater for that.
There's a question, yeah. I see. Yeah, the council doesn't employ our contractor. Everyone puts in $350, and so we pay the contractor, and then we show the invoice or the receipt to council, and they reimburse us to the amount of 2/3 of that, of what we've paid out. So it's really, really good. The average cost per deer, we worked it out, didn't we, Artur? It's about
it's about $200-250.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
And the deer is then given to a neckery, and the neckery is paying for it, for pet food, and of course our aim is to get it to for human consumption, but at the moment we are not yet there.
Great. Any more questions?
There's just one question about problems. Hang on. What problems have you encountered using shooters in populated areas?
There are in populated areas, because our contractor is a professional. He has silencers. He's working with his dog. He makes a shooting plan, which is approved by the police. So at the moment, we haven't had any major problems.
Yeah, I think Manningham the whole council has been declared as a public place area, so there's no recreational or volunteer shooting permitted. It's only those public place permit holders, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Okay, and oh yes, you covered the invoicing and covered the cost per deer. Fantastic. And this is the one controller, isn't it? Or
Yes,
is it...
one controller company. A company. It's a company. They have of course also employed people, but it's mainly 1 or 2 people come to the ground and shoot and get rid of the or collect the carcasses.
Yeah. I only had one other question myself. I can't see any new ones come in there. Well, a couple. Is it an issue? Do you find that the properties are a little bit sort of spread out? Or does that just reflect the good properties of where the control needs to take place?
Yes, it would be good, of course, to have the whole area covered, wouldn't it? Even if those properties weren't suitable, we could have the shooter out 2 or 3 times a week then and really give it a good blast, so to speak. But we just work with what we have, and the good thing about having the same shooter for or the controller for all these years is that he gets to know the people and the properties, and he's very knowledgeable about this whole area and the properties that he has.
Yeah, and
he's really great and very easygoing, and you know, everyone likes him, and you know, we sort of know him now. People do see him. Some people do see him on their properties. I don't know. I don't think my property's any good. I never hear him, or I know it's been down the bottom, but I don't hear him. But yes, of course, we would love a wider area. It's all private land, of course. We're working totally on private land. Apart from, we've got cameras in Warrenwood Reserve, which is in Maroondah, but that's a good area for a control. Yeah. So they have deer, but we're doing it as a control. So there are a number of cameras there. We collect data from that area, but all the culling happens on private land.
Well, I guess that sort of leads on to my one other question, which is, do you promote the program, or does the hunter go on to other neighbouring properties to see if he can bring them on board? Have you looked at the other properties in the area and said, oh, that would be a good one, and tried to speak to them to engage them? Or does council help with engagement of new landholders? Or
yes, all of those. Council's been very proactive. Artur gets out and about a lot. When people see the guys coming to do, say, a vegetation audit, and they ask, what are you doing here? And we talk to our neighbours about it. It's like a lot of things. It's a drip method. Yeah. And as I said, we have people coming and going. We try and hold on to our great properties, and we do. But yes, many pronged, Michelle. It's a real communal thing between the Landcare group, the Landcare Network, and council.
Yeah, it's a really nice partnership. I haven't seen any other questions come in, unless I have something wrong with my computer. I think it should be good. That's fantastic. If there's no other questions, if anyone does think of another question, we can cover that later. Otherwise, I might say thank you very much, and we can...
You're welcome.
Yeah, no problem. Hear from Mike Hall from the Cardinia Deer Management Coalition. Oh, incorporated. That might be an important factor. Hopefully we'll hear about why. Thanks, Mike.
Well, absolutely. Yes. Thanks for inviting me, and it's always great to hear Tracey and Artur. They're so full of enthusiasm and knowledge. It's amazing. Their group started in 2017. I think our group started a year later, and I feel like we're about 5 years behind them already. So our group started in a similar fashion. We put out a Facebook post actually to the local community, because the local community chat was getting louder and louder about issues with deer, whether it's accidents on roads or gardens being destroyed or crops being destroyed. So we held a community meeting back in 2018. We got a full room. There's obviously a lot of passion, and the question at the time was whether we'd be able to turn this passion into action. A lot of people like talking about things, but not many people follow through. But we found the opposite. We found that people were very keen to get involved. So we started our group, which is an entirely volunteer group. We don't, or at that stage, had no affiliations with any land care groups or council or anything. It was really just a local initiative born really out of the Upper Beaconsfield Conservation Group. So we have taken a different tack. Our community hasn't been declared as a populous place. We've already had within our area a significant amount of hunting going on, which is obviously a bit of a concern to local community. So when we had our discussion about what we should do with deer, we decided that the important.
It's off.
Here.
That's better. Where was my track? So we had no funding, and because we had no allegiances, it was just really a group born out of nothing. So we decided that we would use the volunteer route. So what we did was we got a group together. We assessed what our major risks were and what we were trying to achieve. And we decided that we were concerned that there was a lot of both illegal shooting going on in our area and shooting by people whose abilities we didn't value. So we decided that we would try to search out controllers, and we call them controllers because to us this is not a hunting exercise, this is a deer culling exercise. And I think it's important to emphasise that this really, the most important thing here is that we've got a job to do. It's not here for people's enjoyment, it's really a job. So we decided that we would try to get together a list of local controllers. And the reason why we want local controllers is because we figure that they have got, so to say, skin in the game. They live locally, they're not likely to do something that's risky or silly. So we try to select people that were within about a 10 to 15 kilometre radius of where we are. And we put them through some tests. We ask to make sure that they've got good references. We put them through an accuracy test because above all, if this is going to be a long-term game, shouldn't call it a game, but a long-term issue, then we can't afford to take any risks. And the risks that there are obviously accidents, whether it be human or otherwise. It must be humane, because if it's not humane, then the community will turn against it. So we have to do everything we can to make sure that it stays that way. And it must be sustainable and it must be effective. So we wanted to choose people who already had good experience at controlling or even hunting deer, were accurate, had good interpersonal skills. So we would have a chat with them, make sure that they were on the same page, that the reason why they were here was because they were concerned about the environment and that they were concerned about trying to get the deer numbers down, not just to shoot them to fill their fridge. So we now have a list of approximately 7 or 8, 7 it is actually, controllers who control the properties in our area. We have in excess of 35 properties who are actively controlling deer, and we're obviously seeking more, like everyone else is. Our attitude towards the control of deer in our area was that, for better or for worse, that we would treat it as a catchment issue. So we live in a relatively small catchment of the Cardinia Creek. Deer tend to spend most of their time sitting in the valleys and not moving too far from them. Obviously they do cross those and go into neighbouring valleys, but we figure if we can work hard at controlling deer in our valley, and then the next valley over can control deer in their valley, and so on and so on and so on, then eventually the pressure on deer, they'll have nowhere to go. At this stage, you know, we've obviously got the likes of Nillumbik and Manningham working on their deer issue. We'd like it to broaden out. We've had a number of people who have contacted us from outside of our area to say, can we supply them with a hunter or a controller. Of course, I'm happy to lend names, because it's no way that we would ever stop anyone from controlling deer anywhere, because they're all our problem. There was a question just came in about the 7 controllers. I'll get back to how many deers have been taken with this program later on. This is a bit of a difficult issue for us, because as we have no funding, we've got no... Actually, I'll explain it a bit differently. So we don't own or control our controllers. What we are more like is a dating agency. We have a list of people that we think we know are local, we know they're accurate, we know that they have good interpersonal skills. And we basically, when a landowner contacts us, we will have a chat with them and see why it is and what their problem is. If they want to go ahead with it, we'll send out one of our property assessors who will go out to that property and assess whether it's safe to control deer on that property, or even when there are actually deer on that property, because a lot of people will say they've got a deer problem when really their property is just a transition property. The deer will go through, they don't spend time there, very difficult to control deer there. So, you know, sometimes the property assessor will go there and say, yes, look, it's safe, but we're not going to have any success there. We don't take the property off the list, but we just let them know that it's unlikely that a lot of work is going to be done on their property. But while we're on that property, we'll be assessing the properties visually, obviously over the fence next door, to see if that's a more likely spot. And if that's the case, then we'll go and approach those property owners and ask if they're interested in being involved. So when we do make a property visit, and when we've decided that a property is safe and that there are deer there, then we'll give the property owner a list of names of people who they can approach to see if they would like this controller or that controller. So the controllers come with a letter of introduction. They have referees. Once we've made that decision that yes, the property is safe, we tend to take a step backwards at that stage. We can't afford to take on the risk of guaranteeing hunting or culling. Even though we're incorporated, we've done this incorporation in order to minimise our risks legally, and we try our hardest not to give advice that we are not absolutely sure on. But we figure that we can't take the risk of trying to guarantee what a controller does. So what we do say to a property owner is, we will give you a list of names, you do your own due diligence, you check their references, you make sure that you're happy with them, meet them, you come to terms with them as to what you want controlled. And this is not as easy as it may seem, because some property owners will say, look, I want you to take foxes out preferentially, or I'd rather you shoot rabbits or whatever. I can tell you that if they did do that, there's not many controllers are going to want to control for them, because most of them are very keen on taking out deer rather than foxes. But if they're on a property and there are no deer around and they see a fox and the owner wants the foxes taken out, that's what they'll do. So once the property owner has decided on a controller, we give them advice on how to come to terms with a controller, things that you can expect the controller to do, things that you shouldn't expect a controller to do, because there's a lot of unrealistic expectations in property owners. You know, they want the entire carcass removed or so. You might get a controller to do that, but it's very difficult. And so we try to be fair to both the controller and the property owner. We give advice to the property owner as to, you know, what is reasonable. Like, for example, we don't like the town being shot up. We don't think their neighbours are going to be happy if they hear dozens of shots being shot after midnight. So we advise that they try and keep their hours short, preferably stopping at 10 o'clock. Not too many deer taken on one night, because properties neighbouring them will start to get a bit spooked. So the property owner will come to an understanding with the controller. we don't take a part in that contract. We don't sign that contract. It really is between the controller and the property owner. And after that, what we then ask of and can't demand of, because we don't, as I said, we don't control the controllers, but we ask of them is that they give details of how their hunt or their culling expedition goes. So what we like to know is how many animals they see, whether it's kangaroos or wombats. We like to see how many deer they see. We'd like to know how many deer they have culled. We like to know how long it's taken them to do that, because we want to get an idea of the efficiency of these controllers. And yeah, so I won't say this is still very much a work in progress. The issue that we're having the most difficulty with at the moment is getting the data from the hunters, controllers. So we're trying to, because we have at this stage, no money to give in as incentives. That's been difficult. So we're about to trial, I'm hoping, a two-pronged approach where we will reimburse the controllers that give us the data for their time spent. It's not paying them, but we'll say that it's for petrol money or it's to pay for ammunition. And the other side to getting the data off them is that we've been very fortunate to have been selected by Monash University for their IT department, wanting to develop a culling app for us, in which it will make it very easy for the controllers to actually enter all this data in push-button manner, including with a photo on their phone. Some of you might think, well, what's wrong with Feral Scan? Feral Scan is a great app, and I'd recommend anyone using it, but it doesn't give us all the data that we need. And we need this data if we're to try and convince the government or whoever else is going to, we're going to approach for funding. We need to convince them and show to them that we're effective. And the data is what's going to help us do that. So that is how our program runs. It's and if you ask how much it costs us per deer, it costs us nothing per deer. It's all done by volunteers, although we do have a couple of professional shooters who volunteer for us as well. Yes, we don't demand any money of our landowners. We ask for a donation. Sometimes if we feel that they're financially viable and enough to do so, there's a lot of people who can't afford it. But we do say, look, if you could put some money towards our effort, then it's going to make it that much easier for us. So that's it in a nutshell, I think. And as I've been listening to Tracey and Artur and Michelle talk, I've been taking some notes, and I'll just go through them one by one, and then I'll answer your questions after that. So the question was about group collaboration and getting property owners together. This is a really good thing. When it talks about using, you're sometimes unable to control on one property because a lot of properties, for example, end or on a ridge, or they end in a valley, like a lot of them end at a creek, which means that if you are to shoot on that property, you're going to end up with a bullet going over the creek onto the next property. So if you can get the property on the other side of the creek involved, then it gives you that chance of actually broadening out your landscape. So what becomes two properties that you can't control on can become one in altogether large property where you can. So collaboration is really important. Marianne Sawyer from Cardinia Council said to me a long time ago, and unfortunately because of COVID I haven't been able to action this, but there's a lot of rabbit control networks where the owners in, say, a road get together and try and work together on this. And I think that this is going to be a part of the future of our coalition, to try and get hubs where they start to work on this together. I have tried it in one place, and this is one of the downsides, is that one negative property owner has basically vetoed that, which means that no one on that hub is now actively controlling. So this is an area that needs to be considered and managed. If you're going to get a group of people talking to each other and discussing it, I'd really strongly recommend that you have someone who has got very good interpersonal skills to be involved in that discussion, because it can easily go awry. What do I next? Collaborative approach event, yeah. One of the other things, if you're trying to broaden out your network, is to try and get your landowners to discuss the issues of deer with their neighbours, because it's a good way of finding out, just to scratch the surface, touching base as to what the feeling is in the local neighbourhood. Another thing that is really good to do is to get testimonials from properties where we've been active, where our controllers have been active, because there's a lot of nervousness in the community about getting hunters onto property. And if you can get testimonials out from their neighbours where they've had it done, especially, you know, concern from a lot of horse property owners that my horses are going to be spooked. We've got one property which is actually a horse agistment property where we're controlling deer. So if you can get testimonials from properties such as that and show them to people who are concerned, then it's a very good start. Another thing from a group point of view, from our point of view, is just watching and learning and listening to seminars like these that Michelle has put on today, because learning from Tracey and Artur and the rest who are coming along, you know, what has worked for them and what hasn't worked is just vital. You know, not having to recreate the wheel is really important. So from our local point of view, our main concerns are insurance. So we've taken that into account by joining Landcare. So our group now is actually affiliated with Landcare. That was in order to get access to cheap insurance. Safety, so community safety is absolutely paramount for us. Local amenity is extremely important. If we have the shooters, the controllers shooting up the area and upsetting the neighbours, then we're going to be run out of town. We really have to be seen to be doing the right thing and to be seen to be doing the right thing. And the last one is that it's got to be humane. Sorry, you need to have good controllers. And I guess one other thing I'd say is that it's not important to get onto every property. Deer are highly mobile. They'll move around. So don't get hung up on, you know, missing a property here or there. Eventually they'll either eat that property out and have to move on, or they'll just move on through the night to another property where you are. So yeah, don't worry about the fact that the properties that you miss, work on the properties that you can be effective on. So that I think that's it from me. And if I can get back to some of the questions, if I can find them. Where do we
Thanks,
start?
Mike. Do you want me to feed them to you?
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be
Okay,
super.
so you've got 7 volunteer controllers, and how many deer have been taken so far? Do you have any feeling on the numbers?
I would say when we first started, it was a really high number. COVID has come in on the top. So as you know, we only started in 2018 was when we had our first meeting. We didn't start controlling until halfway through 2019, and 2020 was a wipeout. So in our first year, I'd be saying we probably took out about 50 deer. That was in the first half year. The next year was pretty terrible. So the numbers aren't good. We do have a lot of deer taken out in our area because there's a lot of other hunting going on. Mm-hmm. And I think that our numbers are relatively stable for deer at the moment, but We've got 2 research projects which are just about to start, which are going to give us more data on the actual numbers of deer and give us an idea of whether these numbers are rising or falling. I think it's not an unrealistic expectation that we'll probably get around about 20 deer per controller per year. This is a volunteer. So with 70, I'm guessing we're probably going to be handling about 140. But I can't give you hard and fast figures on that at this stage. And the idea is that we were supposed to have another accuracy shoot on 2 separate occasions last year, and COVID got in the way, where we would have potentially doubled our numbers of controllers, but COVID has really cruelled us in that aspect.
Yeah, tricky. So you mentioned there was some property assessments done around whether a property was acceptable or not to shoot on, or whether you thought that was just deer passing through, or if they were staying there for any length of time. Who makes that assessment?
So we have 3 property assessors who are hunters, who are now controlling with us, who are very experienced hunters. So they go to those properties. They've all done extensive culling on private property before, and they're all very well aware of the risks and the things to look out for. They're all very well aware. They're actually aware of not just the property that they'll be working on, but what's going on in the properties that are neighbouring them. So what sort of stock these properties have got, what other issues there might be. So it's basically from experience.
Yep. And how does your public liability insurance work?
So the public liability insurance that we got is through Landcare. So the Landcare, because we are not actually a hunter or a controller group, all we are is a matchmaker. What goes between the landowner and the controller has to be covered by their own insurance policy. That's made clear to them. So the landowners are all advised to have $20 million worth of insurance. The controllers are all members of either SSAA or ADA or Field and Game. So they've all got their own insurance policy. We're still not exactly sure, and I would really love to get a definitive answer on this, that when controllers are on private land controlling deer, they're not hunting. And when their insurance policy with SSAA, ADA, Field and Game are hunting policies. And we're not convinced that if the worst came to worst, that the policy will cover the controls. I know that professionals are okay because their policy specifically says that, but I'm nervous for my controllers. I shouldn't call them my controllers because they're their own people, but I'm nervous for them. They have tried to get a definitive answer from SSAA insurers, but SSAA insurers say, well, you've got to ask the policyholder, and if you ask the policyholder, they'll say, well, that's the insurance company will know the answer to that. So it's a catch-22 there.
Yes, that is a real can of worms. And so the controllers on when they've shot a deer, what happens to the carcass? Is it up to the controller whether it's removed or if it's left?
As I said, that what happens after we put them in touch with the controller is very much a contract between the controller and the landowner. It is one of the things that we specifically say within our advice document is that you need to come to an understanding with your controller as to what you want to happen. And if you can't get to a good understanding with your controller, then move on to another one until you find someone who can. So some landowners, they're in the lucky position they've got a backhoe and they're happy to dig and bury.
Yep.
Others want almost everything removed. Others are happy just to have the carcass broken up so that they can be pulled to pieces by eagles and flies and whatever. That really is very much between the controller and the landowner.
Yeah, great. There's a few kind of bit of chit chat in the chat around insurance and various bodies, which maybe we'll come back to if there's ongoing questions there. We've covered insurance a bit now. I think that means we are almost up to date. There was one more question on does CDMC influence, or do you ask your controllers to use particular equipment, or are there any constraints on that?
Okay, so once again, we don't put any constraints on it. We have advice of the controllers, and if a controller goes onto a property and does things which we don't think are appropriate, then we just won't put their name forward again. So if, for example, they're busy spotlighting around and annoying the neighbours, and we find out that that's the case, then we just simply won't put their name forward. We encourage our controllers, where possible, to use thermal imaging equipment because it improves their efficiency out of sight. We don't like spotlights because they're the things that tend to annoy neighbours. But if there's an understanding between neighbours, and that can be come to, and we do have groups of properties that work together. So if they come to an understanding and they're happy with that, that's fine. At the end of the day, as long as a local amenity is not upset, then that's okay. As for silencers, it's really very difficult for non-professionals to get a hold of silencers. So none of ours have them, but we do have some professionals who volunteer. They do have them, which is a benefit. It's a benefit more for the neighbours than it is for controlling more deer. It's actually the deer you can control. I've seen footage of one of our controllers shooting 4 deer in a group with no silencer. So it's not the silencer that improves the efficiency of the hunter. It's the silencer that stops the neighbours from being upset.
Yes, and very important in peri-urban areas to keep the peace.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Michelle.
Yeah, I will get in touch with SSAA about that insurance as well, because we haven't used them for any works yet, but certainly been in discussion with them about what opportunities there might be in Nillumbik for volunteers to be put forward. I guess a bit like the Farmer Assist program. They certainly seem to think that their insurance would cover them working under the GIC order, the unprotection of deer order, but I'll absolutely clarify that with them as well.
Yes, and I notice a comment has come in from Troy John about accepting money as a hunter, and I agree with him. This is a really difficult issue. It's one that we have to work our way through, because we can't pay controllers because that will negate their insurance. So it's just an issue that we need to get some legal advice on. So thanks for the comment, Troy.
And another later comment from Troy around the closest meat processing facility. Would that be in Yarra Glen, the pet food abattoir?
Yep.
Yeah, they're really few and far between, aren't they?
Mm.
Great program. Yeah, I'm really impressed at how it's going. I'm really excited about your app. I can't wait to see how that works. Yeah, you're right. Feral Scan doesn't include everything. I think I'd probably ask people to put it in the notes section, which is not very helpful. But hopefully you can sell that or share it with everybody, because certainly that would be a requirement that I would have of those listed on our community directory that I'll talk about later, that they supply information back to us on what they've seen, not necessarily kangaroo numbers, but maybe, but yeah, more so those deer sightings versus deer control, and where they saw them and why they couldn't control them, perhaps. Yeah, great to talk about that.
Yeah, in my view, just very quickly, getting deer numbers is kangaroo numbers and wombat numbers is actually important, because at the end of the day, the tenet of our group is to protect our environment, and we need to understand the relative impact of deer versus kangaroo versus wombat. And in decreasing deer numbers, if that's what we achieve, how does that affect deer, wombat, kangaroo numbers, and how does that affect the overall vegetation damage? So it's all sort of so closely interlinked that we need to know that.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I can't see any more questions in there that are relevant at the moment. So I might say thank you.
Oh, sorry, I've missed one thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go right ahead.
It's probably a fairly major part of what I should have talked about. So I've described how we do it, but what you've said in your thing was about working with various agencies. This is something that we have tried right from the very beginning, and we are working with Melbourne Water, Parks Vic and local councils, especially with Cardinia, in working together with surveying and informing each other of what's going on. Cross-tenure shooting, on the other hand, or cross-tenure control, is still something that eludes us. And if someone has come up with a solution to that, but it's absolutely, we're finding that the amount of cooperation we're getting is fantastic. But there's this big hurdle of how do we get across the cross-tenure. It's not a vital hurdle, but I know that Parks Vic could do a lot more control if they were able to actually shoot across a boundary. And I've said to them that, you know, approach us and we will contact the property owners, but that hasn't happened. But it is an area where I think we're very keen to find if someone has come up to a solution to this and keen to push it forward.
Yeah, absolutely critical. I agree. I might have some good news on that, but I think it's always going to come down to funding. And if their funding can only cover their properties, then they'd be a bit hamstrung. But if they could work in with your guys shooting voluntarily on the private and Parks Vic working on their land, that'd be a start. But yeah, it's an ongoing challenge. Hopefully the Victorian Deer Control Strategy will, the action plans that come out of that will encourage those agencies to push forward and undertake some more works, or just provide them money to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that MJ has just written in here that parks are able to operate on private land if they want to, and if they get the. So I want to follow that one up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks heaps, Mike, and for to Michael for his comment there. That's great. Excellent. Well, we might find out what's happening in Strathewen then. How does that sound, everybody?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
No worries. No worries.
Thanks, Michelle. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Great.
Might have to turn off my microphone so we're getting feedback together. Oh, that's going to be challenging because I need to ask you questions. Maybe the pictures prompt you to talk. So,
no, Michelle, I don't mind giving myself a bit of an intro. I should probably just say, look, you know, the Strathewen. We probably should relabel this Strathewen. Well, harvesting is good, but maybe culling as well, culling operation, because really we're nothing like these other groups, these amazing groups that have formed in these other communities. I mean, what I have coordinated in Strathewen really has been just 2 culling events, and we've really just flown on the back of the city of Whittlesea's deer control program on the other side of King Lake National Park, even to the extent where we utilised their contractors, namely Wild Game Resources. And I'll just explain what happened exactly and why we got involved. So I work at the City of Whittlesea, so obviously I knew that that these guys had been employed to undertake the program for council, but City of Whittlesea had a lot of trouble getting interest from the private landholders adjacent to Toorong Reservoir, King Lake National Park, Mount Disappointment State Park area, and as a result, we had wild game in the state being paid and not having enough properties to visit and undertaking shooting. So I said, look, tell them to come to Strathewen, and within a few hours, I probably had all those properties there that you've got highlighted in yellow. Being a resident, had them organised to have the shoot proceed. They took out 20 in one night, and they visited again, and so they were set to take out the same number again. That this the following shoot night, but unfortunately got really bogged with their harvester, and they had to stop at 3. But look, all those properties gave their permission for wild game to visit their property that night. However, obviously, none of us were concerned whether or not the deer were taken out on our property or not. We just wanted to see a drastic reduction in the number or the population in our area. So at the end of the day, they ended up taking those predominantly from one particular property, which you can see. I think, Michelle, you've got 2 green dots there, one with 25 and one 3. Is that right?
Yes, they are the numbers, I think, that were taken off that.
I think Trish's place with the number 25 on it, that was actually where both nights I hate to call Trish an absentee landowner, but Trish is an absentee landowner. And as a result, in absence of any sort of real grazing pressure from domesticated animals, the deer have moved in. It's an incredible property. It's I think it's 100 acres. Michelle, you've probably seen the figures in GIS.
Yeah, this is just pictures of Trish's property there, just for reference. I recorded the property sizes ranging from 9.4 hectares up to 51.2 hectares. So I think the 51 was the Trish's place. That one with the 25 is. Hopefully that's correct.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, my property is in the bottom left, and that's 75 acres. So we all have sizable properties. And look, I mean, even today we could add another half a dozen properties. I could call them up right now, and we could have another half a dozen properties on that list. And so the interest is there in Strathewen, but there is no money. The private landholders do not have the money to spend on deer control. So unless there is going to be a council-led culling program, you're not going to get a lot of interest. This is my personal opinion as a resident there and knowing a lot of these people personally. Also, I guess with Wild Game Resources, they're a really unique company. I'm not here to spruik them specifically, but they actually provide landholders with money. So they actually pay us, which really at the end of the day makes sense. If you've got a landholding of that size and you've got deer grazing it, essentially you're breeding deer, you're feeding the deer, so it makes sense to be paid for it and for that meat to be harvested off the property and then sent to the abattoirs, just like cows or anything else. So that's a massive incentive for people to engage contractors like Wild Game Resources. I actually just tried to Google them a minute ago and it looks like their website's disappeared, which is a little bit concerning. But yeah, feel free to try and track them down and try and contact them, because if you have enough landholders in your area, they will send people out because it's in their financial interest to go to places where they're going to collect 20 deer in a night, and they could do that in Strathewen repeatedly. And that's even with local residents shooting. My partner shoots regularly on our property and takes the odd one out, but he's a recreational shooter. He's never going to take out the numbers that we need to see real impacts. What we need is regular culls where 20 deer are taken out to really reduce that population. And what you can see in that photo is, well, I think that's pig pugging up in the top right-hand corner. But anyway, they do have an impact in our area on farming properties. We're vegetable growers, and we have the whole place surrounded with makeshift deer-proof fencing. But the biggest impacts are definitely on the native flora and the bush. And I see that every day when I walk through the bush and see that, the ground flora has been decimated. There's very little recruitment in canopy species in the mid-story, and that for me is the most devastating impact from deer. even more so than the economic impacts to our farming business, to be honest, seeing that the native flora devastated the way it is. That bottom right-hand corner shows you the deer harvesting vehicle that's used by wild game. So you can carry sort of, God, I think it's 20 carcasses. And that's what rocked up in the morning. And I was so excited to see that harvester come in the morning. I thought, what an amazing night just to pick up that many. And those guys use silencers, so the impact to the local community is minimal. Look, everybody was aware of the cull. Most of the people were involved, like had given permission. There were a couple of landholders where they didn't want deer culled on their property, but I think that they respected the rest of us and our decision to go ahead and do it. But yeah, there's always going to be, members of the community that don't agree with it, and no amount of educating can seem to get them on side. So I think you need to be selective about how you advertise these sorts of things. I don't think I think I've got Trent Corshi from my community here online today, but we've experienced that, if you tell, if you get on social media and sort of announce these things to everybody, it can cause a lot of issues, and it's a sensitive topic. So I guess my approach is just get in quick and fast. It's been really good doing it sort of within 24 hours, finding out that I've got access to wild game, notifying the property landholders who I know have already agreed, and then just doing it all quickly and getting out of there. That's, for me, been the best approach in my community.
Yeah. And so you just rounded them up by sending out some emails or telephoning them or door knocking, that kind of thing? Because
I just created a messenger group, Facebook Messenger group with all the people and then I'll be like, hey, it's me again. The hunters are coming today. Let me know if there's any dramas. Otherwise, they've already filled out the paperwork before giving permission. So yeah, I'd say in Strathewen, the way we've done it is really just a couple of culling events. It's not sort of that ongoing sort of.
So then no plans for more?
Oh, look, if I can get wild game out, yeah, we'd do it again for sure. But not being organised by me currently, no.
Yeah, fair enough. Because I only have reservations for harvesting because I worry about whether there'd be interest from those harvesters to come out if there's low numbers. But I did chat to Brett about that, and he said that's fine. We pop a big cooler room out on somebody's property, which he would pay them to have it there. So it covers all the costs for any electricity, and then he can shoot on multiple properties over a much wider area, wait until they've filled up that cooler room, and then put that on a big truck and take it back to New South Wales. So yeah, they're not a local crew, but they're quite willing to come down to Victoria to do these projects, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. And they've since had some success in Whittlesea, and have had more landholders get on board. But I guess one of the biggest challenges in Whittlesea side is that a lot of landholders have developed a relationship with a recreational hunter, and have someone coming regularly onto the property, and they don't want to threaten that relationship and their ability for that hunter to pick up deer. But the problem is with that, and that's amazing, and it's great to see that that's happening. But if your goal is to reduce numbers and reduce them quickly, then unfortunately, I think the culling is the only way you can really achieve that. I mean, I think we talked about someone, I think it was the previous presenter that said that, they took 20 deer out over a 6-month period. Well, it's just not going to have the sort of impacts that we need to actually see and minimise disturbance in the bush and on these properties.
Yeah, it's a real shame, and I can only encourage the recreational or volunteer shooters out there to take what they want for their personal needs, to help out with these huge numbers and leave a few on site. Take a couple of extra that you don't need, but you can take a safe shot, and that way it helps out a little bit more. Because, as Izzy said, the damage to the vegetation is definitely increasing. I've been up in the Alpine region, and you don't notice the damage up there in a lot of locations, but here locally, the damage to the vegetation is really evident, and we just can't cope with the numbers that we've got here. And yeah, we need more than just recreational occasional shooting.
Maybe if we had better population data, because there is this real fear that commercial shooters are going to take them all out and there won't be any left for recreational hunters. And I just don't think that that's going to happen. It'd be great if it did happen, sorry, from an environmental point of view, but it's not going to happen. But the problem is we just don't have the data to show how many there are. Yeah. So if we could do that, perhaps there wouldn't be so much fear that these commercial guys would be ruining it for everyone, I suppose.
Yeah, yep. That's a good point. Okay, we've got some questions, Steph. Easy.
So comments from the chat. It seems that wild game harvest may be out of business or not available to Victorians anymore. That's not good news.
No.
Well, they were at our session 2 weeks ago and made no mention of that. So maybe their website's just down.
Hopefully.
Sure. Yeah, we'll find out.
We've got a question here from Troy. Hi, Michelle. The biggest issue I have is as a recreational shooter, I could shoot any more deer, but really hate to see it go to waste. I cannot take it for human consumption and cannot legally give it to friends or family. So what other options are there?
Yeah, I don't have a solution for that. If you're not wanting to waste meat but can't use it, it's an impossible situation. Other than getting your harvesting accreditation through PrimeSafe and being able to take that next step and actually get them harvested. But I recognise that that's a cost to the hunter. Yeah, and you've got to get vehicles set up and all that sort of thing. So that's not easy. There's no good answer for that.
There were some other questions around cents per kilo from wild game harvest, but if they're not here, then it may be we won't be able to get that answer unless you know, Izzy or Michelle.
I'm pretty sure 25 cents a kilo was what they were offering, yeah. But I mean, look, to be honest, if they're providing a free service like that and taking those numbers out, I mean, it doesn't really matter. You know, that's better than anything else at the moment. So I think it ends up being, maybe $100 an animal is what we saw when they came out.
Yeah, great. And is there any contracts involved in those arrangements?
There was like paperwork between wild game and each of the landholders saying, just giving their permission to harvest the animals. Okay.
Because Micah said, I've heard that they tied up some property owners in contracts that prevented the landowner from using other controllers.
Never seen that in the paperwork.
Fair enough. And I think we're up to date.
Thanks, Steph.
Yeah, really. These are all such great projects. It's amazing. Wild Game had said $2.50 and 50 cents for the landowner last session. Yeah, it was something like that. I couldn't remember off the top of my head. Thought it might have been 30 cents, but again, yes, possibly a moot point if they're not around. But there are other harvesters around. So
Mike's just asked me when the last time was that they shot on my property. It was months ago. But I know that they shot for City of Whittlesea in December 2020.
Okay, so not long ago. Fantastic. Any other last minute questions for Izzy? Excellent. Thanks so much. I'm going to give you an update on my project now then. Thanks, Izzy. Click, please advance. There we go. So I've just been asked at a couple of sessions about the success of the Sugarloaf Link project and how we went with that. And I didn't really think initially that it fitted in with tonight's session, but I had another think, and I realised actually it is collaboration. It's everyone getting together, and the difference is that it's funded under a different model predominantly and not coordinated by the landholders, but the principles still apply. So the Sugarloaf Link is a 3-year project which has been funded by a 3-year biodiversity response planning grant from DELP, which is due to finish up at the end of June this year. We were encouraged to apply for this grant, and we sat down with some local experts. We had Parks Victoria people, Melbourne Water, Wurundjeri elders, Landcare groups, friends groups, some vermin controllers, a whole range of people, and we looked at the issues that were occurring over the whole of the Shire and realised that the deer were causing the main concern for most people, and there was varying degrees of success in how control efforts were going. And so once we'd settled on that, I should say we are also doing weed and fox, but won't chat about them. We located the project in the southeast corner of the Shire for the reasons that it's surrounding the Sugarloaf Reservoir. The King Lake National Park is not far above here, and there's some control happening there. But more importantly was the, I'm circling things on my map that you can't see. So Melbourne Waterland is here. The Manningham Jumping Creek projects are happening over the other side of the river. So that's the Yarra River here. So we thought that this was a good location to run a control program in those sites. There's also high biodiversity values throughout the Bend of Islands area, and the Yarra corridor is seen as a high biodiversity site, but also a natural corridor for deer, and we were hoping to stop them from jumping over the river and getting into Manningham when they're coming down from King Lake. So this map shows some pink and orange properties. So we had 300 properties invited to participate in the project, and we did that through written invitations, mail out. And out of those 300 properties, we had 98 people sign up for deer control, which is nearly 30%. It's ridiculously high rate of participation for a project. And despite what some people might think with what you might expect from a bunch of greenies, they were very supportive of a shoot program, and all of these small orange blocks are all the properties that signed up. But what we found was that they weren't particularly appropriate. As we've heard, you've got to have properties that are a good size and are productive and are safe, and don't just have those transient deer moving through. It's pretty inefficient just to sit there and wait for them. And some of the properties look a bit like this, which is a reserve, but really thick Bergen and just completely inaccessible. So these pink properties are the properties that we have been doing some control on. So there's around 35 properties that are involved. And as you can see, they are all clustered together. We have very few gaps. Now, I've got to say that a lot of these properties did not sign up initially with that initial mail out that we did. They were brought on board after the project started, so that word of mouth got out and people went, ooh, I want a bit of that as well. So that was very helpful. And also the contractors, in the process of door knocking the neighbours and letting them know that they were going to be working on their neighbour's property and explaining the project. They probably explained it a little better than I did. The landholders got to meet the contractors and went, okay, they're actually okay people. And so that was a much easier way of getting those properties on board in terms of their support of the works being undertaken, because I just had that confidence in what was going to occur. So they're the properties that we're working on. We use a combination of techniques in terms of control. They do some vehicle-based work and on-foot stalking as well, depending on their access within those properties. And that has been very successful. If I just click through here, this is just to highlight something that Mike touched on, which is land tenure. As I mentioned before, we have Melbourne Water land surrounding the reservoir. That's a closed-in catchment, it's fenced in. I would have seen that video of the deer all running through. We don't have access to that, but Melbourne Water are planning control in there, so that's a great start. But there's also a whole lot of land around the outside of it, which is marked in blue here, which is perhaps leased land, but it's not part of the catchment. There are others within the project boundary as well, but you just can't see them under the pink, which is our deer control area. So we've been working really hard to get Melbourne Water to give our contractors access to those properties. Some of them had been leased and we were able to get agreements from the leasees, but a lot of those leases have since finished. And we have pretty much today been given final clearance to access those properties. We have authorities to control wildlife, or authorities to destroy game in this instance, because deer are a game animal. That's now being processed through GMA rather than DELP. So we had to get some ACTWs for some of the Crown land Melbourne Water, and the others require land access agreements with Melbourne Water and the GIC landowner form to be signed off. And of course that had to go through the hierarchies at Melbourne Water to make sure that they were satisfied that all the risks had been taken into account. So that is due to start soon, is Melbourne Water control works on these leased lands. And then the brown properties here are the Parks Victoria estate reserves in the area, and we have managed to get permission from Parks Victoria to undertake deer control in the Yannaki block, which is part of the Warrandyte-King Lake Nature Conservation Reserve. So our contractors will incorporate that work into their nightly routine. So they might start in this part of Yannaki and then move through a co-op and down through the other side. Actually, this map is not current, and there are a lot more properties around here who have signed up, but they'll be able to do a drive through all of these properties, and if they don't see deer, they can keep going, which is great. If they do see deer, they can stop and cull to their heart's content without worrying about whether the next property is not available to them, because they're all signed up. So that is great news. So we have got that cross tenure approach happening, but you know, we've got a few months left only, so we are hoping for more grants to be able to continue those works. So the learnings, we do need to identify productive areas, as we have mentioned, and having those adjoining properties is really highly beneficial, because you can move from one to the next without having to come out of that property, drive half a kilometre down the road and into the next property. If the deer jumps the fence, you can jump the fence too. So that's fantastic. And the process of having neighbour notifications is really critical. So I would say to anyone who's thinking of organising a community-led project, to make sure that you've spoken to all your neighbours, and not that they have to be on board with the process. Not everyone is supportive, as we've established, but to be able to get contact details for them so we can send those text messages through saying, hey, we've got works planned, and yep, cancelling those works if there is some event on that's going to impact productivity, and also just we don't want to disturb those neighbours, or even the participating properties, I should say. And these photos just give a good indication too of the mix of vegetation and terrain. We do have some really steep hills, which makes retrieval of the deer very difficult, but we've got some nice large open areas with those great fringe country, we call it, where the deer hide in the trees, run out onto the grass to feed, run back when they're scared. So it's a really good location to find lots of deer, and productivity is what we're looking for. And then on the flip side, you have these very steep bushland properties that are probably heading down towards the Yarra, and they mainly have the transient deer moving through, and they'd be really unproductive to work on. So if you lived in this gigantic mansion of a house that I would like to live in, you might find that a controller says, no, can't do any control here, or they can, but it'd be really inefficient, and they would encourage you to seek surrounding properties where you could do works much more easily. So I guess we've done that on behalf of the residents by contacting them. Yep. And for results, they have been going down. We started off really high. We were taking, 15 deer a night. However, as we have progressed and we've been doing monthly control, the numbers have dropped down. And I think that's because we've taken huge numbers. So 243 deer have been removed since November 2019. But we were starting to see a drop off, as you can see, in October and November of last year. So we've put a little halt on the works and are looking for some other locations where the deer perhaps have not been spooked and run elsewhere, or we're just giving them giving them some time for the sites to reset and the deer to come back in, and been sent a couple of photos from one of the sites to show, yep, the deer are back. So we'll be recommencing our control efforts in the next couple of weeks. In fact, one of the contractors did start last night, but it was way too windy. So these are the factors that you need to take into consideration. So moving forward. This is our original project area. We had some discussion at one of our earlier sessions about the fact that we'd expanded it. And I think, Mike, you might have asked, what's the new control boundary? Well, it's huge. It goes up to about Wild Dog Creek Road up near St Andrews, and it follows the Diamond Creek down to the Kangaroo Ground Wattle Glen Road. Now, that's a huge site. We've tripled our project area. The original project area was about 10% of the size of Nillumbik, which was around 4,000 hectares, 4 to 5,000 hectares, and we have now increased that to 14,000 hectares. So we're looking at about a third of Nillumbik, and these orange sites are the areas that we prioritise. So the contractors drove around, looked at the high biodiversity reserves and where we got complaints, and flagged those as sites that probably need some attention. But we've settled on just 2 sites that we're preparing shoot plans for now, and we've got all the properties engaged. So as an example, this is Europe Reserve in Panton Hill, some Crown land on the side where we won't be working because we can't be bothered getting a permit just for that tiny section. And then the blue properties are those that we invited to participate in the project. Again, not up to date. The darker blue ones have signed up, but we've got almost all of the properties surrounding Europe all up on board. And then the purple sites are those that we notify. So again, that notification process is highly important, and we'll be adding properties around the bottom for notifications because they've now come on board. So it's just a bit of an example of what a control site might look like. And this is incorporating some of council land, and we're still getting tick off for actually working in council reserves, because much like the challenge of getting onto Melbourne Water and Parks Vic land, can we get access to council land? We've got to close the reserve. So we're just running through that process now, but hopefully we'll get onto those properties shortly. Steph, do we have some questions?
Mike asked about DELP being in DELP land within your program.
Yeah, we've got a little bit. There's a couple of properties down within the area of Skyline Road near the Heritage Golf Course or north of that. That site was originally open for recreational shooting, but it has been removed from the maps. Yeah, we could consider those sites as well, but we haven't gone down that route because we haven't needed to, because there's so much area within Nillumbik that needs attention. Yep, moving forward, we'll definitely consider working on those properties as well.
And Mike also says DELP for the ATCWs. I'm not sure, what is that acronym?
Oh, authority to control wildlife. So despite the fact that deer are not wildlife, they are listed under the wildlife as a protected game species. So any works on Crown land require that authority to control wildlife. But weirdly, the last time when I went to apply for the permit for the Melbourne Waterland, it came through as an authority to destroy game. And I received my first signed one of those yesterday, and yep, it's all very new. I don't know whether that's the way they're going, but they're supposed to be phasing those out anyway. So as part of the deer control strategy.
Is GMA providing the paperwork?
Yes, they provided the paperwork. Yes. So I was in discussion with them, and they sent me the paperwork, and that's what it was. It was a GMA ATDG. Yep, first I'd heard of it.
Great. And I think we're up to date. Artur sent through a photo, but I need to reload it because I can't see it.
I can't either.
Can anyone else?
Yeah, I don't think it's very easy to share pictures unless we share a screen. But Artur, if it's important, we can email that through and let us know what that was about. I just looked at the time. We've obviously been chatting all too much, hey?
Only, what is your cost of deer shot?
Oh, yeah, so we were on about the same rate of 200 to 250, but as you can imagine, as that productivity dropped off, the price did increase, and that was why we sort of pulled the pin and went, no, that's now too expensive. Our guys are amazing in terms of just going, right, there's not enough deer, I'm going home. So it's not like we're paying them to sit out there and do nothing. They'll give me a call and say, not seeing anything. Do you want us to wait another couple of hours or go home? They go through all their properties, and some nights they can drive around and around and not see a single deer. And yeah, they're freaky evenings, those ones. But as a result of having a couple of nights with not seeing any deer, that was why we changed our approach and started looking at different properties, getting new sites on board, and yeah, looking to expand the area. So moving forward, I don't want to be focusing on a tiny project area. I'd like to have the flexibility of looking at key sites throughout the entirety of Nillumbik. I think that'd be better. And yeah, working in with Parks Victoria to complement their projects.
That sounds very exciting, Michelle. Does that mean you might be in our neck of the woods then?
I really hope so. As you can see on this map, we did flag a couple of sites that were close to King Lake, and yeah, your area would absolutely be up there. So we've just got to cross our fingers that more grant money comes through. Yeah, we can never promise anything. Yeah, we're at the mercy of grant funding, unfortunately, for covering deer control.
I just called Catherine as well from City of Whittlesea to confirm that wild game are coming out for Parks Victoria and King Lake next week. Look, it's Brett, whether he's operating under wild game or he's now operating under a different PTY Ltd is we're not sure, but they are still operational in some sense.
Yeah. I have dealt with Brett under a different business name, so that might be what's happening. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions, Steph? Because we need to talk about your LMIP.
Yes. Just quickly, how many were harvested out of the 240 that got shot?
Oh, yeah, most of them. The only deer that are left behind are those that are just not able to be retrieved. They're fallen in a gully, and just the landowner has said, oh, that's okay. If it's out the back, no one can see it. Yeah, let that one be. But, oh, gosh, I didn't get those stats, but it'd be 95% would have been harvested. It's really minimal. Occasionally deer are given to the landowner, you know, back straps or whole animal, whatever's been decided, like everyone else. It's an arrangement with the property owner. But yeah, we did ask that the majority were harvested, but it's a huge time commitment. And if we could leave them on site, despite the fact that it's a waste, we'd be a lot more productive. So we've got to think about, are we culling or are we trying to make use of deer? And it's a real tricky one.
Yeah, a conundrum.
Any other questions we need?
Up to date.
Is there a map to see? I don't know what map you're looking for, Mike, so maybe that was for Artur. Okay. That means, Steph, that I can hand over to you to chat about the program. Would you like to have a chat about that quickly?
Yes, so I run within council the Land Management Incentive Program. It runs on a co-funding model where we can, the community gets in contact about a various environmental issue, and we can fund, usually it's a contractor, to undertake various environmental works up to 50% of the bill. The program, it's internally funded by council, ongoing, annual every year, and it targets rural Nillumbik predominantly, so our green wedge zone, rural conservation zones, and also some properties in ESO areas. So some smaller residential properties that have, say around Eltham, the Eltham copper butterfly habitat, even though they're not, maybe don't fit into RCZ, we can support them through under the ESO. So the program covers weed control, pest animal management, re-veg, biodiversity fencing. People can also claim going and doing courses, or like the A-Cup course if they're wanting to do chemical work, and also novel works. And part of that, part of the pest animal management section that we are looking at now is deer control under that branch of the program. So until this point, I guess the backstory is the program was developed before deer were really a thing in Nillumbik, so it's not something that we've historically covered, but moving forward, we know it's obviously it's a real priority for the community. So we are looking at how we can include it under in similar ways that we would undertake group rabbit control and fox control projects. So that might look like a minimum of 5 properties working together. So when we're funding rabbit projects or fox projects, we ask the community to get together with their neighbours, because we know that, again, landscape scale is very important for pest animal management, like weeds as well, but especially pest animals, because they do move, and deer are no different. So it's funded 50% of the cost of works, up to 50%, with a maximum of $2,000 per property per financial year, depending on the nature of the issue. So weed control projects will often fund 3 years in a row, and then the problem is hopefully and often just quite small and only requires maintenance works after those 3 years. And that means that the landowner, the problem is reduced and they can tackle it themselves after that point. Deer may be a bit different depending on how many continue to come into the Shire, and community appetite to undertake council co-funded works. Just like in, I guess, with any other program, all the safety hoops and hurdles would be required. We'd ask that a contractor be professional, have the appropriate permits, shoot plans, and then notification required, depending on the nature of the permit. And yeah, that's where we're at now.
Yeah, it's good. So a bit of feedback there, isn't there? Yeah, we are trialling at the moment. We have not yet funded Deer grant through the LMIP project, but we're hoping that we can get some of these community groups set up. I've visited a couple of properties to look at their issues and talk about, where would be good for control. We did say that the contractor needed to be professional, and I think that works for most of Nillumbik and those areas that are larger properties, say for instance around Strathewen. They're large enough that you could probably get a volunteer in to do some works, in which case you wouldn't need any funding because it would be free. So there was a question about
why 5 properties.
Yeah, why 5 properties?
So I guess it really comes back to that that point that we want to promote deer control as a community-wide activity. So the same way as Manningham has pushed with their program, we know that if we're ever going to get in control of deer, especially in peri-urban areas, it does have to be landscape scale, and it needs a lot of people involved across the community. And where we have properties working together, it means that, say, Paula, who has a terribly deer impacted property, but has really, it's not a suitable or safe property to shoot on, she might be able to collaborate with nearby neighbours who have properties that are more suitable to shoot on, and thereby can, I guess, share the burden of that particular cost of the project, and then achieve control that way across the landscape. So I guess we're saying 5 as a minimum, but we need to because that's where we are at with our rabbit projects and our fox projects, and that tends to work really well. But where this goes, we'll see.
Yeah, we're flexible, and we'll talk about individual situations, and I think we'll always take that into account. The comment, the deer probably walk through 4 properties to go into the 5th, but isn't that why you need all 5? Because it's guaranteed if you're on one property, the deer will be next door. If you're on that property, the deer will be next door. You have all those properties signed up. There's so much more flexibility in terms of the control and moving around those sites. Or it goes back to that cost sharing issue where not all of those properties might be suitable. You might have a lot of small bushland properties that surrounding one large property. Don't have an image available immediately to show, but that gives you that flexibility of everyone contributing, but the control work's taking place in that one large property, but the other properties contributing financially to get some better benefits.
Yep.
That might be one example of where you need those extra properties. How do we get landowners to engage contractors when Nillumbik is shooting them for free? There's enough deer for everybody, and we're not focusing everywhere. We're not trying to take away work from contractors, and we will have a tender for a new contractor panel, and you never know, you might end up on that panel yourself if you're a professional deer controller, so don't be too concerned. You might feel like we're taking all the work, but really we're only working in some very small areas realistically, so lots of areas we have not gone anywhere near yet. But I understand the one of the biggest gripes is how much it costs, and as soon as we say to people they have to contribute, even if it is only 50%, we get a nah, thanks, but no thanks. So we are only fully covering the costs for that Sugarloaf Link project. And that's
because it's grant project.
Because it's a grant funded project, yep, absolutely. And even if we did have a grant which covered the entirety of council, we're not going to be shooting on all those properties because it's just not realistic to do that. So I think there's work for all of us, and I think that comes back to us all collaborating, not just the landholders, but if the hunters, recreational, volunteer or professional can collaborate with council, we can actually strategically work out areas that perhaps some of us are more suited to work on than others, and we can divvy it up. I can share it out. I think it's doable. So we've got some sessions coming up to get a deer directory in place, which I probably have a slide for coming up next. We've got a number of options of how we can assist landholders, and I'll tell you about them in the last 1 minute. But the deer directory is probably the main one. The resource that people might be looking for is how to get in touch with local deer controllers. We won't be recommending anyone from that list or taking any responsibility for for safety, but we will be putting this list together that people locally can contribute their names to and their details. And we've got a training session coming up where we will talk to those potential people on the directory and give them our best practice guidelines for what we would like to see from those on that directory. A bit like what Mike said, if they're not good or adhering to how you would like them to operate, then we might just boot them off the registry. And just a little heads up of the upcoming workshops. Oh, we are doing the Managing Deer with Your Neighbours. So that Deer Directory requirements session is on the 28th of April. So if you are a volunteer or professional shooter and would like to be involved and on that directory, please come along to that session. And for those wanting more information on setting up community action groups in your neighbourhood, flip me an email. There's the generic email there, that would be great, or that's my phone number, and I will be able to arrange a site visit with myself and one of our contractors to assess your properties as a collective, hopefully, get a few neighbours together and we can get the ball rolling on working out what you need to do and developing those plans with you to give you an idea of what to do next. Oh, there you go, Troy. So there's my email. So now you have it. Any other questions there? No. Cheers, indeed. I've got a lot more examples of photos of properties that are difficult to shoot on and hard to, easy to shoot on and hard to shoot on, and why I might opt to work in other areas, but we've run out of time. So we're going to have to talk about those things in person at a site visit. So I highly recommend that you get in touch with me to arrange a site visit and we can come out and talk about your particular circumstance. Yeah, what happens when the grant runs out? Well, hopefully we get another grant. That's a really good question, and we are looking to transition the properties that are currently signed up so that they can continue to do some kind of control, and maybe that would be with a volunteer shooter, or they might be able to move on to somebody else that is listed on that register. Yeah, we can't just stop because the deer will just come back. It's an ongoing piece of work that we have to do, unfortunately. Yeah, next round of DELP funding, thanks Izzy, and lots of money came out of the Victorian Deer Control Strategy, so I am highly hopeful of a bunch more money being available, and hopefully we will get a slice of that. Any final questions? All silent? That sounds great. Well, in that case, I can see that it's past 9 o'clock, so I will have to wrap it up and say good night. I'd like to thank all of my guests for tonight, Mike Hall, Artur Muchow, Tracey Wood, Steph Orive and Izzy Amouzandeh. How was that? I just never get that right, but I gave it a crack. So thank you everyone for helping me out tonight and sharing your stories. I'm really amazed, and I'm hoping that we can all take away something really positive from all those stories. And if you have any further questions about those, I can put you in touch with any of these people, or you can chat with me and I can help you out some more. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you at perhaps our property management session on the 19th of May in a month or so. Okay. Excellent.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Michelle. Much appreciated.
No problem at all.